When I walked into that courtroom, my daughter Sophia rolled her eyes at her husband as if I were just another bothersome elderly woman. But when the judge recognized me, everything changed. "Mrs. Alina," he whispered, eyes widening, "it really is you." The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence as my daughter and her arrogant spouse exchanged panicked glances. "My name is Alina. I'm 72 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was just an ordinary grandmother. Every morning I woke at dawn, prepared my coffee in a ceramic mug that my late husband Carlos had given me for our 25th anniversary, and tended to my rose garden while watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. It was a simple, predictable life, but filled with small joys that kept me connected to precious memories. For nearly 5 decades, I was the mother who sacrificed everything for my only daughter. Sophia, I worked as a housekeeper during the day, took in mending at night, and sold homemade pastries at the local farmers market on weekends. Also, Sophia could attend good schools and have the opportunities I never had. When she married Roberto, a man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them, I swallowed my discomfort and welcomed them for Sunday dinners with my best dishes and a smile that hid my concerns. After Carlos passed away, I hoped Sophia and I would grow closer. How wrong I was. Instead of finding comfort in each other, she began seeing me as a burden. Her visits became perfunctory, her calls less frequent. The way she looked at the house where I raised her, where she took her first steps, where we celebrated all her achievements, changed completely. It was no longer a home full of memories, but an asset to be acquired. The greatest disappointment of my life happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. I had prepared salmon with potatoes, the recipe Sophia loved as a child. I set out the embroidered tablecloth, as I made when she started college, and even bought fresh flowers for the occasion. When they arrived, Roberto entered without knocking, as if he already owned the place. He collapsed into the armchair that had belonged to my Carlos and turned on the television without even greeting me. Sophia carried a folder of documents and wore that distant expression she'd developed over recent years. A look that belonged to a stranger, not the child who once held my hand with such trust. "Mom, we need to talk," she said with a cold voice that chilled me to the bone. She sat on the edge of the sofa, as if she didn't want to stay long. "Roberto and I have decided this house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore." I felt my heart constrict as she continued. "We found a wonderful assisted living facility for people your age. You'll have companionship, activities, medical care. But Sophia, this is our home," I replied, my voice failing. "Everything we built is here. All our memories." Roberto interrupted, without taking his eyes off the television. "Memories are in your head, Mrs. Elena, not in the walls. You'll like the facility. It's modern, has a garden." What he didn't say, but his calculating eyes revealed, was that they wanted my house. The house that Carlos and I built with so much sacrifice over the decades. It's the house where we kept not just memories, but pieces of our souls. Sophia placed the folder on the table. "We've already handled all the paperwork. You just need to sign." Her voice was mechanical, as if she were discussing any ordinary contract. Not about uprooting her own mother from the only place I had left in the world. When I refused to sign, the atmosphere quickly changed. Roberto turned off the television and faced me with a coldness he'd never shown so openly. "Mrs. Alina," he said, adjusting his expensive tie, "you need to be reasonable. You can't continue living alone. Last week you left the stove on. It's dangerous." That was a blatant lie. I had never left the stove on in my entire life, but I realized in that moment they were willing to invent anything to get what they wanted. In the days that followed, they intensified the pressure. They brought real estate agents without warning me, strangers who measured my rooms and talked about renovation potential as if I weren't present. Sophia began packing my belongings without permission, deciding on her own what I needed to take and what could be discarded or sold. "This dress is so old." "Mom," she said, holding up the blue dress I wore to my husband's funeral, "you won't need it at the facility." Each object she discarded felt like having a piece of my history torn away. Old photographs, love letters Carlos had written me, books we read together on winter nights. All of this was just clutter taking up space in the house they already considered theirs. The final straw came when Sophia found my jewelry box. It was a small, carved wooden box that Carlos had given me on our first wedding anniversary. Inside, besides some pieces of sentimental value, was the pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. "I'll keep this safe for you," she said, putting the box in her purse. "These things can disappear at the facility." In that moment, I saw something in my daughter's eyes I had never noticed before. Greed. Pure and simple greed disguised as filial concern. And for the first time in my life, I felt a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. That night, alone in my room, while listening to Sophia and Roberto talking in low voices in the living room about how to solve the problem I had become, I cried as I hadn't cried since my husband's death. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of indignation, of revolt against the injustice of being treated like a disposable object after a lifetime of dedication. It was then that I made a decision. I wouldn't leave without a fight. I wouldn't allow them to erase my existence, to reduce me to an inconvenience to be solved. With this newfound determination, I dried my tears and began thinking about how I could defend myself against those who should have been protecting me. What I didn't know was that soon I would discover a secret that would completely change the balance of power in that house. A secret that my dear Carlos had kept to protect me precisely for a moment like this. The next morning, Sophia arrived early with more boxes and renewed determination. "Today we're going to organize Dad's office," she announced, heading toward the room I had kept untouched since Carlos passed 3 years ago. "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised her. "That room isn't ready to be touched yet." "Mom, it's been 3 years," she replied impatiently. "We can't maintain a shrine forever. The house needs to be prepared for sale." I realized in that moment that no matter what I said, they had already decided my future. The house would be sold with or without my consent. They would find a way to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. When Sophia went outside to get more boxes from the car, I entered the office and locked the door. This was the last refuge of my husband's memories. The place where his scent still lingered in the air, where his things remained exactly as he had left them. I ran my fingers over the books on the shelf, over the papers meticulously organized in folders, over the picture frame with our wedding photo. It was then that I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. On the top shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of old encyclopedias, there was a small safe built into the wall. In 45 years of marriage, I never knew of its existence. My hands trembled as I tried to imagine the combination. I tried our wedding date, Carlos's birthday, Sophia's birth. Nothing worked. Finally, on impulse, I tried the date we met. That rainy Sunday afternoon when we took shelter under the same awning of a bakery. To my surprise, the safe opened. Inside was a leather folder with Carlos's initials embossed in gold. When I opened it, I found documents that left me breathless. Property deeds, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, stock certificates in renowned companies, insurance policies with values that made my head spin, and in the middle of it all, a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this letter, it means I've passed away and you've found what I kept to protect your future. Forgive me for keeping our had built an empire in silence to protect me. While I thought we lived modestly, he was investing in properties, stocks, in businesses that were now worth a fortune." Among the documents, I found something that left me speechless: the deed to the building where Sophia and Roberto lived. The luxurious apartment they were so proud of, which they flaunted as a symbol of their success, actually belonged to me. They paid rent to a management company that deposited the amount directly into an account in my name. An account I didn't even know existed. There was more. Carlos owned shares in the company where Roberto worked. Not minor shares, but a significant stake. Enough to influence important decisions, even about the future of employees like my son Dash and Dash Law, sitting on the office floor. surrounded by papers representing more money than I ever imagined possessing. I laughed through my tears. Sofia and Roberto thought they were kicking me out of my house to keep it. Having no idea that this house was the smallest of my properties, insistent knocking on the door brought me back to reality. "Mom, open this door right now," Sofia shouted. I quickly put the most important documents in my purse and returned the rest to the safe, closing it carefully. When I opened the door, Sofia looked at me with irritation. "What were you doing locked in there?" "Just saying goodbye," I replied with a calm that disconcerted her. "You're right, Sofia. Maybe it's time to move forward." She studied me suspiciously, but then her face softened, believing I had finally given in. "I'm glad you understand." "Mom, you'll see it's for the best." "Yes," I agreed, firmly holding my purse where I kept the documents that would change everything. "I'm sure everyone will get exactly what they deserve." That night, while Sofia and Roberto celebrated their apparent victory with an expensive bottle of wine in the living room, I made a call to a number I found among Carlos's contacts. "Dr. Carmen Vega." "Attorney Dr. Vega. My name is Elena Martinez, widow of Carlos Martinez. I need your help with some urgent matters related to my inheritance." When I hung up the phone, I looked at Carlos's photograph on the nightstand and smiled. "You always knew, didn't you, my dear? You always knew this day would come." For the first time in months, I slept deeply, not with the resignation of someone who had been defeated, but with the tranquility of someone who had finally found their strength. Dr. Carmen Vega was exactly as Carlos described her in his notes. A middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes that didn't let any detail escape. When I entered her office 3 days later, she'd already analyzed copies of the documents I sent by email and prepared a preliminary strategy. "Mrs. Elena," she said after offering me coffee, "your husband was extremely meticulous. All the documents are in order. The investments were made legally, and the will is absolutely uncontestable. You are, without a doubt, a very wealthy woman." Those words sounded strange to me, having always lived counting pennies to make ends meet, but the lawyer continued, showing me a detailed report of all my assets. "Most interesting," she observed, "is that your husband structured everything so your daughter and son-in-law can't contest it. The behavior clause in the will is particularly ingenious. They would only have rights to part of the assets if they cared for you with love and respect. Considering what you told me about their attempts to remove you from your own house, we can easily argue that clause was violated. What should I do now?" I asked, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. Carmen leaned forward with a determined gleam in her eyes. "First, don't sign absolutely anything they put in front of you. Second, I need you to maintain the appearance that you haven't discovered anything yet. The more they expose themselves, the better for our case. As for the house, let them think they've won for now. Pretend you're considering moving to the facility. Ask to visit the place. Question the costs. The more they reveal themselves, the more ammunition we'll have." In the following weeks, I followed Carmen's guidance to the letter. I allowed Sofia and Roberto to continue with their plans, feigning resignation while secretly documenting every conversation, every veiled threat, every attempt to demean me or make me seem incapable. Roberto even brought a doctor friend to evaluate my mental condition. A man who barely examined me before suggesting I might be developing dementia. I recorded the entire fraudulent consultation on my phone. Following Carmen's instructions, Sofia, for her part, intensified her efforts to empty the house. Box after box of my memories were packed, labeled, and sent for donation or simply discarded. It hurt to see my memories being treated with such contempt, but I held firm, knowing that each of their actions only strengthened my case. One afternoon, while Sofia cataloged my belongings in the living room, I let slip some information casually. "You know, Sofia, I was thinking of giving you my pearl necklace before going to the facility. It was your grandmother's after all." She stopped what she was doing, visibly interested. "The pearl necklace, the one you kept in the wooden box." "Yes, but I can't find it." "Have you seen it anywhere?" Sofia blushed slightly. "No, I don't know what you're talking about. It's strange," I continued innocently. I also can't find the sapphire earrings your dad gave me for our 40th anniversary. I hope they weren't lost in the move. I saw the discomfort in her eyes, the momentary guilt that was soon replaced by a poorly crafted excuse about having stored my jewelry somewhere safe. Later, I reported that conversation to Carmen, who smiled with satisfaction. Perfect. We're building a solid case of financial abuse. The decisive moment came when, following Carmen's advice, I asked to visit the assisted living facility before making my final decision. Sophia and Roberto took me on a Sunday, showing me a place that looked more like a warehouse for the elderly than the paradise they had promised. Tiny rooms, overworked staff, and a disinfectant smell that barely masked the odor of urine in the air. "Isn't it wonderful, Mom?" Sophia asked with forced enthusiasm. "Look, it even has a community television room." I looked at the depressing room where half a dozen elderly Zoot people stared blankly at an old television and felt my stomach turn. "How much does this place cost?" I asked. Roberto answered promptly. "Don't worry about that. We'll sell your house, and the money will be more than enough to cover the costs for many years. And if I live longer than the money lasts?" The silence that followed was answer enough. They hadn't thought about that, or worse. They had thought about it and didn't care. On the way home, I remained silent while they animatedly discussed their plans to renovate the house as soon as I left. They talked about tearing down walls, modernizing the kitchen, turning my room into a home office for Roberto and Dad's room. I asked suddenly. Sophia hesitated. "Well, we were thinking of turning it into a guest room, or maybe a larger closet." "I see," I replied, looking out the car window to hide the pain in my eyes. That night, I called Carmen and told her, "I'm ready. Let's proceed with the plan." 2 days later, Sophia and Roberto appeared with the final papers for transferring the house and my admission to the facility. A man in a suit accompanied them, their lawyer, who I later discovered was just a friend of Roberto's who worked as a real estate consultant. "Mom, we brought the documents for you to sign," Sophia announced, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "As soon as you sign here and here, we can finalize your move to the facility. We've already reserved a spot for next week." I looked at the papers calmly, pretending to study them while listening to the doorbell ring. "Who could that be?" Roberto asked, irritated by the interruption. The partially emptied rooms, the unsigned transfer papers on the table. Carmen remained by my side, calm and authoritative presence that emanated confidence. "Mrs. Alina," said the social worker, "do you feel coerced to leave your residence against your will?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "My daughter and son-in-law have pressured me for months, even threatening to declare me mentally incompetent if I didn't agree to go to a nursing home." Sophia stepped forward indignantly. "This is absurd. We're just trying to take care of her." "She's confused. She's forgotten things, left the stove on." "Interesting," Carmen interrupted, pulling a small device from her pocket. "I have here recordings from the past 2 months that contradict that claim, including a conversation where Mr. Roberto admits to having invented the stove incident to convince Mrs. Sophia that her mother could no longer live." Lone Roberto paled. "That's illegal. You can't record people without consent." "Actually," Carmen smiled, "Mrs. Alina recorded conversations in her own house, where she has every right to protect her interests. Additionally, we have recent medical reports attesting to her full mental capacity, performed by independent professionals, not by doctor friends brought by you." "Sir," the social worker took notes on her clipboard while the court officer continued his methodical work. Sophia collapsed in a chair, crying openly. "Now, Mom, why are you doing this to us?" "We are your family." "Family," I repeated, feeling a mixture of sadness and indignation. "It was as family that you packed my memories like they were garbage. It was as family that you took your grandmother's jewelry without permission. It was as family that you and Roberto planned to abandon me in a substandard nursing home to keep my house. It's not like that," she sobbed. "Roberto convinced me it was best for you. He said you were getting worse, that it was dangerous for you to live alone, and you believed him instead of trusting your own mother." I asked, feeling my heart break again. "After everything I did for you, after all the sacrifices, how could you believe I deserved to be treated that way?" She sat on the sofa, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Because it was easier, she finally confessed. It was easier to believe you needed help than admit I had married a man who only cared about money and status. It was easier to pretend we were taking care of you than face the truth about what we had become. Her face contorted with genuine shame. When Roberto first suggested selling the house, I said no. Then he started planting doubts in my head, little seeds of worry about your mental health, your ability to live alone. And I let those seeds grow because deep down, I wanted the house. I wanted to transform it, modernize it, erase the marks of the past that made me feel guilty for not being the daughter I should have been. Her words hit me like a revelation. It wasn't just greed. It was guilt. It was the desire to erase the evidence of everything I had done for her. Everything she couldn't reciprocate. And now I asked, "What do you want from me, Sophia?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, as she did when she was a child. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just came to return what's yours, and to say that even if you never forgive me, I know what I did, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person." I looked at my daughter. Because despite everything, she was still my daughter. And I saw something I hadn't seen in years: honesty. Not the calculated manipulation Roberto had perfected, nor the false concern she had exhibited in recent months, but genuine vulnerability. "Where are you living?" I asked. "With a friend for now. I'm looking for a small apartment I can afford on my salary." I nodded, absorbing the information. "In the apartment. Roberto is there," she replied. "He kept almost everything in the separation agreement. He said it was the least I could do after ruining our plans." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Roberto continued being Roberto until the end. "Sophia," I said finally, "I can't promise things will go back to the way they were before. You broke something deep between us, and it will take time, if it ever happens, to rebuild that trust." She nodded, accepting my words without protest, but I continued. "Your dad believed that deep down you were still the girl he raised. He believed you could find your way back to the person you should be. Dad was always better at seeing the good in people than I was," she murmured. "Yes," I agreed. "And maybe I need to learn to have a little more of that faith." I didn't forgive her that day. I didn't invite her back home, nor did I promise to forget what had happened. But when she stood to leave, I didn't stop her from hugging me briefly. A timid and uncertain contact that contained as much regret as hope. After she left, I was alone with my recovered jewelry and the pain of a betrayal that was still very fresh. But for the first time in months, I also felt something different. Not just the satisfaction of having defended myself, but the possibility, however remote, of healing. 2 weeks after Sophia's visit, I received an unexpected call from Carmen. "Mrs. Alina, a situation has arisen that you should know about. Roberto didn't pay the increased rent according to our agreement, and from what I understand, he's planning to leave the country." "Leave the country? Where to?" "Apparently, he has a cousin in Portugal. My sources at his company indicate he resigned and is already selling his belongings." That didn't surprise me. Roberto was always the type to run when things got difficult. What surprised me was what Carmen said next. "There's something else. Sophia contacted me yesterday asking for legal help. She discovered that Roberto emptied their joint accounts before the NTE separation and left her with various debts in her name." I felt a pang in my chest. Despite everything, it was my daughter who was suffering. What does she intend to do? "We're filing injunctive measures to prevent him from leaving the country without resolving his debts. But honestly, I think he already transferred the money abroad. Sophia is practically bankrupt, in addition to being in debt." After hanging up, I stood looking out the window for a long time, watching the garden where Sophia used to play as a child. I remembered Carlos's letter, his words about using power not to hurt, but to protect and teach. The next day, I asked Carmen to prepare some documents and called Sophia. "We need to talk," I said simply. She arrived punctually. Dressed in simple clothes I had never seen her wear, the glamour of an executive's wife had disappeared completely. Carmen told me about Roberto. I began as soon as we sat down. About the debts, the money, everything. Sophia nodded resignedly. He planned all of this months ago. While we were pretending to worry about you, he was already preparing his escape. I was so stupid, Mom, so blind. We talked for hours that day. Not as the adversaries we had become, but as two women who had loved the same man, who had shared the same house, the same dreams, and who now faced the wreckage of trust and love. Sophia told me about the years of manipulation, about how Roberto had gradually isolated her from friends and family, about how he had convinced her that I was becoming a burden when what he really wanted was my house. I told